Hello, my name is Wade Caves. I have been in, well, I guess, how long have I been into astrology? It started when I was in middle school. I'd met this group of friends who all had very eclectic interests. Some of them were very interested in Nordic folk music. That same gal was also very interested in Maori tribal music from New Zealand. I had so in that same group, we had friends who were into numerology. Some of them were into um, uh, just diverse interests like that. So, I mean, when I joined this group, it was essentially my turn to pick something weird and fringe. And so I had looked on the bookshelf, and one of them had a book on astrology. And I didn't know what astrology was. I just thought it was the same thing as astronomy. And I picked it up, and I thought it was, in fact, it took me probably a few months before I realized that wasn't what astronomy was. At any rate, yeah, it was an interest of mine since middle school, and it kind of stayed with me. I moved into college, and I think that's probably where I took a break and pulled back a little bit for a year or two. But it was a really quick transition back into astrology when I got close to graduating, and started studying with the Mayo School under Wendy Stacy, and had an absolutely excellent experience working with Wendy in the Mayo School in general. And then upon graduation, started studying with Deborah Houlding in the School of Traditional Astrology. So, I mean, I think I probably really started to take astrology with a more serious interest in 2013, in June of 2013. Well, I think most of us start studying natal astrology. That's how we come into it, with our own birth charts or the birth charts of those that we have a crush on, or our sisters or family. For me, it was very much the same. I mean, there was really no change there. Came into astrology with natal, but then eventually moved to study horary and realized that that's really what I wanted to specialize in. So I've spent a great deal of time studying and learning horary astrology, electional astrology, and mundane astrology. I would think that those three probably are where I've spent the most of my time. But I don't want to be known as, a horary astrologer. It's my belief that every astrologer should have a working knowledge of horary. And it's not just my belief. I mean, that's the school that I teach for. That's the belief that we hold, and what we kind of try and push for. So my specialization is in horary astrology, but I am seeking to branch out. So this year I've got a lot of things that I'm studying further this year. Medical astrology is on that list, as well as natal astrology. I'll be spending a lot of time digging into both of those. So I do see clients. Yes, I have a full-time practice that keeps me pretty busy, and I have what I think are the best clients in the world. And I'm sure every astrologer thinks that, but they're really diverse. I mean, they come from all over the world. I think when you specialize in horary, you usually do get people who are very much connected to astrology, because the average person has never heard of horary, wouldn't be able to pronounce it if they saw it written down. It's not a very easy word to figure out how to. I avoided saying it for a month or two when I first saw it, because I didn't know how to say it. So a lot of my clients are either astrologers themselves, or are being directed onto me from other astrologers, or have been kind of interested in astrology for a while, and so are familiar with the work that can be done with horary or electional. And in terms of like what kind of topics, I see a lot, I would say it's actually fairly, trying to make sure I give an honest assessment here. It feels very balanced, but I do get a lot, and I enjoy them. I get a lot of career questions. So I can remember I was at a conference, this was probably NORWAC, either 2016, and just in a group of people, and we were talking together, and one of them said out loud, it was a group of people talking about horary astrology, and said, I just seem to only get property questions. And the other one said, I only get relationship questions. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And I realized at that moment that I had just that week been thinking about how many client requests come in that are centered on career. So my ninth ruler, so the ninth house, is connected to astrology, but really it's about, counsel, and where we go for advice outside of ourselves. And my ninth ruler is the moon. and the moon is in my 10th house. And so I started to think to myself, I wonder if where the moon is, or not the moon, sorry, but where your ninth ruler is, would give an indication as to where people intrinsically feel like you might be able to give good advice. And so I started that kind of hypothesis was born at that exact moment. So I looked at the gal who had said, that she only gets property questions, asked her what sign was on her midheaven, and I made an assumption that may or may not have been true. So she said it was Virgo. I just assumed that Leo was probably on the ninth cusp. And then asked her where her Mercury was. And sure enough, her Mercury was in the fourth house. And then for the individual who had relationship questions, there was two of them. And one of them had their ninth ruler in the seventh. And the other one had the ninth ruler in the fifth house with the seventh ruler. So I think that there's probably just an innate thing that happens with all of us where people perceive us as, this person's got this situated and figured out, maybe I can turn to this person for advice. So, it was kind of an interesting thing to talk about in that group. And that woman, actually, she'd been dealing and trading in a lot of property herself. And it turned out she had plenty of, property experience. And then one of the gals joked that she's been through a lot of relationships. So she had a lot of relationships. She's good at getting into them and good at getting out of them, she said. So
I suppose it helps.
Yes, right. So I think the things that I talk about with my clients are pretty diverse, but there does seem to be a focus on life path and career. Well, I should tell you that most of my consultations, 95% of them are all via email. The other 5%, some people want a phone call or a Skype call or to meet in person. But my client base is all over the world. I've got plenty of clients in Australia, South Africa, Europe, all over Europe, and all over the US. So meeting in person is difficult. And sometimes even with all these time zones, it's difficult to find some time to meet online. So very much email has been a great help to me in the work that they do. In terms of getting prepared, it depends on the consultation I'm doing. If it's a horary consultation, I really just read the email, make sure that I've got a good sense of what's going on and what the client needs to learn. And then I just launch into it. I open my software, and then, my emails back to my clients very much are, right, you're looking for a relationship consultation with me. You've got this person you're interested in. You're wanting to know if you two will be together. To judge whether or not you would be together, here are all the things that I look for. And I list them. I say, I need a connection between the first ruler or the seventh ruler, or, the seventh ruler in the moon. I'll list all these things that these would be indications. And then what I do is each line item where I say, this is what you might be looking for. Right there, I will list whether or not that's present. So in the consultation itself, it's almost as if I'm having a conversation with myself. But I also, part of my consultations, I always want to be teaching how to do this every time that I have a consultation. So every client who has a consultation with me will get 3 or 4 paragraphs about, here's what I'm doing, here's the approach that I'm taking, and you can watch me in all of the steps. It's almost like in math, they say, show your work. So that's what I try to do, show my work all the way through. So there's not a lot of preparation that's needed there, because all I really need to do is just answer the question. And by the time that I've done that, I've more or less done all the work and prep work, and I hit send and move forward. Now, if it's a natal consultation, that's very different. And so usually I will ask the client to provide me an area of focus. Maybe they want to talk about finances or romance or career or children. And then once we've established that this is where they'd like to focus their time, I spend a lot of time taking a look at their birth chart, at their solar returns, their perfections, any directions that are happening, transits. So I probably spend a few hours going through that before we talk. And most of the natal consultations I do, those 5% I was telling you about, those will be the natal ones that we do over phone or Skype, because it's just so much easier to have a voice, when you're talking about something that is that personal. But I still email everything afterwards, because I do in most cases, because I like there to be a record of what we talked about. Sometimes people are really kind and they want to give you credit for saying something you didn't say, or predicting something you didn't predict. And I just want to say, no, I didn't say that, but I'm glad it happened for you, etc. But it also takes the work out of me needing to keep records over my consultations if I shoot an email over. Like I just have to look for the email and we're good to go, So it helps keeps my files clean and orderly. So I am actually in the process right now of reading Graham Tobin's Culpepper's Medicine. This book is hands down. I was at an AA conference. It must not have been the last one because I think I did miss that one. The one before, and he sat right next to me at the banquet, and we'd not met before, and I actually wasn't aware that he'd put a book out. This is the danger of coming into astrology only a few years ago, is you sit next to amazing minds and have no idea, And I knew that everybody liked Graham, and I knew that everybody really valued his input and his thoughts on things. But I'd never really run across any of his work because I wasn't really orienting myself towards medical at that time. And I have done since. And I'm reading this book, and I was at the FAA conference down in Australia in January, and I bought this book from their booksellers table. And I remember picking it up going, well, I'm glad I got it finally, and maybe I'll start reading it on the way home. And I didn't. But this week I just started reading it, and it is just absolutely mind-blowing. He really connects some very powerful points. He's done a tremendous amount of research into Nicholas Culpepper's life, and then brings all the bits of medical astrology that are a little bit tough to weave together. He brings them together fairly effortlessly. And, for somebody like me who needs a little bit of a hand-holding to make sense of things sometimes, I couldn't be more grateful. So I can't wait until I accidentally run into him again, because I just want to give him a big hug. And then I'll tell you one more, is Dennis Elwell's Cosmic Loom. That book, I think, written from somebody from a totally different perspective, maybe even a different approach to astrology. And I remember getting 2-3 chapters into that book and just thinking, I feel like I'm on a spiritualist retreat right now with just me and Dennis. Wow. And he's speaking right to my heart about all these really important topics, and how we understand the place of astrology in a world that is becoming increasingly more scientific, and where scientism and the belief that science is currently perfect and able to answer all questions in its current state. How do we reconcile the reality of what we're experiencing with astrology with the world that we're in today? He nailed that for me, did an amazing job. And I would say something similar about Jeffrey Cornelius's Moment of Astrology. So those 3 books, I would say for anybody who's going into astrology in kind of a serious way, who wants to teach or is looking to deepen their own practice, the book from Jeffrey Cornelius, Moment of Astrology, and the book from Dennis Elwell, Cosmic Loom. Those are mandatory required readings. Like, you've got to read them both. And then for somebody who's just interested in, seeing what great research looks like, really tremendously flawless research, Graham Tobin's Culpepper's Medicine, just have to recommend that, absolutely. Astrology is in a really interesting place right now. The internet has done so much for astrology, and at the same time has done a tremendous amount to make an authority out of anyone. And I think where we're going to find an interesting challenge in the next few years is being able to divide out people who are just really good at self-promotion and marketing and social media, and understanding that some people just really know how to flip an audience. They know how to bring people in and get people liking and sharing and having a good time, and that's absolutely important. And I think that building community in that way is really remarkable. There is probably a difference, though, between people whose primary strength is in that vein, and people who have dedicated their lives to actually understanding the concepts of astrology so that they can teach them well. And there are a few people who have both of these skills. You know, there are absolutely names that have both of these skills. So it's not as if you have a good social media presence, you can't. That's not in any way what I'm saying. But there is a kind of democratization and decentralization that happens on the internet, which is great in so many respects. But it does also cause fake news. You know, a lot of stuff to go out there where you trust it. But does it really hold up to close scrutiny, to analysis? And does it work, and is it really connecting at the heart? Because this is the other side of the internet, is that these connections that we're building with people, are they real connections? Like, how deep do those connections go? And the material that we can discuss through an online forum, how deep can that conversation go? I think even when the conversation is really powerful, it's still fairly surface, because there's the heart component that's missing. So I think the really interesting thing is that we're shifting soon out of the Jupiter-Saturn triplicity in Earth signs, which is, really, I think, then, the Industrial Revolution and, kind of the building of nation states. And now we're moving into a Saturn-Jupiter cycles in air signs exclusively for the next, couple hundred years. So it's going to be interesting how we deal with all this information flying around us, and moving in every direction, and figuring out what it means to hold community in these spaces. The biggest, I did mention science, and I think that Western culture in general is going to need to deal with the problem of scientism, which is a religion just as any other religion, is the belief that science is perfect in its way that it understands the world. And that belief is no different from belief in a Christian God or Hindu gods, or I see no difference there. But that isn't really, to me, I don't think that is actually the largest enemy that astrology has. I think the biggest threat to astrology is not actually outside of our community, it's inside of our community and how we treat each other. I think astrologers are the greatest threat to astrology, and have been for most of our history. And it's just going to be so important for us to survive, as we move into the next millennium, really, that we find a way to build strong partnerships and community with each other that keep us close to each other in our hearts and in our minds. Because that's the only way, when real challenges come from outside, is if we're united internally. And it's not that we all need to be uniform and practice the same astrology. It's about unity and not uniformity. Budding astrologers, where they start is that there is just with so much inquiry and curiosity, but there does get to be a place where curiosity starts to die a little bit, and you kind of realize that it's very easy to be a big fish in a small pond in the astrological community. It is. There's not a lot of us, and most of us are maintaining other jobs, and so can't give 100% of our time to astrology. And it's very easy, I think, to feel like you really understand astrology and that you have it locked down, because when you look around the room, you feel equal to or greater to maybe the number of people, or sorry, the knowledge of the people in that room are carrying with you. When you go to conferences, for instance, so many of the people who are at conferences are there to learn, and so you can talk yourself into a false sense of security that you've learned what you needed to learn, and now it's time for you to start practicing and kind of closing your eyes and ears and doors to what else might be out there for you to learn and understand. And I think that this is something we see on the modern psychological side, and I think it happens even more on the side of people who study classical and traditional astrology, just by nature. I think that the modern psychological approach is there's so much ingrained in there about the depth of human experience. But in traditional astrology, there is, especially, when we're in these kind of revival periods as we are, there's a tendency to look backwards so much. And when we look backwards, we have to remember to keep, at least one eye on the present, if not also the future. It's like there's closed eyes and ears and doors to anything that modern psychological astrology can teach. I think it's a real shame that the people who believe in their hearts, even if they'll never say it with their mouth, that Astrology was perfected around a certain, era, BC or AD, whatever you choose. And that we just need to return to that. And I don't really think that that's our job. Like, I think we need to take from that what we can and then carry the torch forward and move the tradition forward. And so what I worry about with new budding astrologers is just to remember that there's never going to be a moment where you figured it all out. And if you don't have that front of mind, there are going to be subtle ways that you disappoint yourself, and you cut yourself short of experiences that you should have. Learning experiences, counseling experiences, client experiences, even speaking opportunities. I've been very blessed to have the speaking opportunities I have. In 2016, I had 1 month where I wasn't flying somewhere to speak. I mean, it was a very busy year for me. And I think it was probably the same in 2017. I've never allowed to convince me into this place where I figured it out and I can just rest on my laurels. Like, I've still got things to learn and things to study. So just, I would say to all new students to just remember that, and just stay humble about the whole thing. Because there are cool little parlor tricks you're going to be able to do with astrology as you learn. And just don't let it get to your head. Stay humble and stay curious. One of the things that feel really important to me about the growth of the astrological community is we break away from this idea that there are things that we're not allowed to criticize or to touch or to question. I think a lot of the tense squabbles and disappointments and disagreements we have internally in the community is because, or it at least partly stems from people feeling very protective over their own research and the work that they've done and what they've built a career around. It's moments like that where you almost just feel like you're not allowed to talk about it. You're not allowed to say what you want to say, because it causes tension because people feel so closely tied to the work that they do. And, I think astrology, in terms of like finding another academic study or interest that most closely connects to what astrology is like, it feels like economics is the closest, mirror career, where, economics are saying we've seen this trend before, and we've seen this trend before, and we've seen that trend before. And when all of these three things happen at the same time, this was the result that we saw. Now we're looking in the current time and we see two of those trends and a third one we've never seen before. Here's our educated guess about how this will go. And economists are expecting that other economists will come in and say, hold on a second, I just want to call to your attention some details that you might have missed. And that is a welcomed, normal part of that community because everybody grows from that. I don't know why we can't have that. And we don't. We just don't. We don't have it. We have regulatory bodies. We have education bodies. We have all of these different organizations that seek to maybe create something like this, but it's lacking. And I think as a result, we'll always be a few steps behind where we could be until that changes. I am going to be giving a pre-conference workshop on counseling relationship issues using horary astrology. It's one of my favorite workshops because I think when you start studying horary, you realize very quickly relationship issues, everybody's got them. And these are the people that they're always coming to you. When will he leave his wife for me? And, all these kind of silly things. So relationship issues are very common for horary astrologers, and it's wonderful for budding astrologers to get that under their belt as soon as possible because it helps to up their confidence. And when you have confidence, you always do better. You just absolutely do better, even if it's a topic or question you've never had before. Having a little trust either in yourself or in nature or in the universe or whatever's brought this question to you, having a little bit of confidence goes a long way. And I think relationships are so easy to judge. They're just so easy. And so it's a great workshop for building some strength and confidence there. So I'm looking forward to that. And that will be mirrored with, I'm either in the afternoon or the morning, I can't remember, but John Frawley will be doing the other workshop opposite me. And his topic looks fascinating as well. So it'll be, I think, a lot of fun for the pre-conference workshops in the traditional vein. And then I will be also giving a lecture on horary astrology in general and how it stayed alive. horary astrology after the 17th century kind of fell out of popular astrological circles in Europe. But there was a candle lit in the United States, and there was a lot of practitioners here, a lot of them, and many of them were very skilled and very gifted and did a tremendous amount with what little resource they had available. So that talk is going to be kind of an homage and honor to those individuals and the work that they've done, and some examples from their case files. Some very good ones too that I think are fascinating and deserve study. So that'll be my talk, and I'm very excited about it because that's a new talk. I've never given that one before. I've got a fairly robust research project that I'm working on right now. Earlier in this call, I said that I was researching natal astrology, but I want to be more specific with that because it's not as if I don't understand natal astrology. I'm zeroing in on specific aspects of natal astrology. And right now, what I'm doing is giving a lot of time and energy towards understanding length of life techniques. And these techniques were passed down. I mean, you can find them in Ptolemy, Dorotheus, I mean, all the way through the medieval Persian era, through the Renaissance. I mean, they were everywhere, but they were so prolific. And why were they so prolific? And do these techniques work? You know, are they reliable? And so I have a pretty intense, you know, kind of, what's the word, empirical kind of survey and study that I'm using different techniques, because the authors don't, it's like, surprise, the authors don't all agree with each other. And so there's little points of interpretation where it's like, if you follow this Dorotheus path all the way down, maybe the technique doesn't seem to work. But if you use half of Dorotheus and then part of what, you know, maybe Ptolemy discusses, and then maybe a little bit more coming from, you know, a mixture of these two Persian authors, maybe you land somewhere that is consistent. So this is the kind of work that I've been doing, is trying to find out, you know, what parts of these techniques work. And then also asking, you know, is there any value to these techniques today? Because it's a very different world now than it was for most of our history. I mean, we've never had a year quite like 2018, 2017. So, you know, is there anything to take away from these techniques? Is there, and this is the questions that I'm still asking. So that's a project that I'm working on. And October of this year, I will be presenting out this research at the State of the Art conference in Buffalo, New York. It's Donna Van Tone's wonderful regional conference in the northeast of the United States. But we get a lot of folks from Canada and the Toronto area come down as well. So yeah, it'll be a lot of fun.
And is there a book coming out afterwards, do you think?
Well, it's going to actually be, I think probably not a book, but it will be a few, like probably 100 to 150 pages worth of research material that anybody who attends these talks will just get for free. You know, it's like Deb, my mentor, Deb Houlding, told me very early on that it's not how much you get out of the work that you do, it's how much you give away and give back for free. And I always think to myself, for every, you know, one thing that I put out there and charge for, I need to give 3 things back for free, always. So that's the way that I try to handle it, is at least making sure that I'm giving so much away for free. And I think in terms of this one research project, anybody who attends these talks, I think I'll probably give them a free download of it. I don't know if it's going to be something that I put into an actual book, though. Possible, I don't know. I can remember there's a friend of mine, he's a great musician from, I got lucky meeting him. He's actually, if I was to say the name of his band, that everyone would know it, but I won't go there to call him out. But one of the things he said was, to be a good musician, you must be better at something else. And there has to be something else that you're good at, because you learn so much about music by living anything about the natural world. You learn better by doing something other than that thing. So, you know, he gave an example of, like, he wanted to be a better musician, and so he practiced cooking, and now he can be, like, you know, really strong chef. And I kind of think it's the same thing with astrology. If we really want to be good at astrology, we have to have one foot in this real world, hold a job, have kids. There's got to be something that's teaching you about life outside of just being an astrologer. And so that's what I mean when I say, you know, it's so important to have a little bit of life under your belt, to be able to relate to clients, not in a mental way, but like, I have definitely been there, you know, and I know what you're going through, or a version of it. So anyway, I kind of took that question in a different way, but maybe it'll be a book. I don't know. But I imagine I probably will include this as just a very long chapter when the day comes that I do write about natal astrology. I think that's how I'd rather approach it.